looking at the future, we should especially have a master plan for the future, a projection that will give us, because vessels have changed, ships have changed. The capacity of import into Nigeria now is enormous. And really, I think we need to discuss that issue and see what can be done. Most of the action that we've been doing before was as a result of certain events. And I would like to thank our former Minister, Ambassador Dr. Kema Chikwe, who had also significantly tried to see how we can improve our situation in terms of flow of goods into the port. But there has been too many problems. I can only mention a few for now.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Bello Gwandu. I noticed that Dr. Mrs. Kema Chikwe has joined now. And I'd just like to take this planning, port development, before I come back to you later. You know, over the years, we've seen ports go back and forth in terms of their, the emphasis on their development. There was a lot of excitement when the Onne Port was being invested in as a deep sea ocean terminal and all of that. And in later years, there was a lower emphasis on ports outside of Lagos. I'd like to ask Dr. Chikwe what the orientation was to planning and what, was the long-term prognosis for port development in the country during her time as Minister for Transport. What if Dr. Chikwe is still?
Can you hear me now?
Okay, I can hear you now. Please, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Pat. And I'm happy. I don't know if it's a coincidence or you planned it to join Dr. Bello Gwandu and I on this program. Because when I was appointed Minister of Aviation, I can tell you outright there was chaos in the sector, starting from ports congestion, moving of cargo, policy, everything. I did not inherit a laid down plan that we should follow. And that was why we had to settle down to develop a plan for ourselves for the maritime sector. You see, Bello led the foundation, as I said earlier. The ports, the existing ports that were functional were more or less the Lagos port, the Sapapa port, Tinkan, and so on and so forth. But you see, as a minister, I came in from the political level in the sense that we needed to get things done fast. And we needed the human infrastructure. We needed the expertise of people to work with to get this done. So the first thing that I did when I came into the ministry was to appoint new sets of managing directors. And Bello happened to be one. The ministry, all these parastatals, the most important parastatals, their headquarters were moved from Lagos to Abuja, which was a major problem too. And we had to relocate them to Lagos. I remember when Bello entered his office in Lagos and was overseeing the port, he saw the congestion, he saw because it was an international issue. And he started work immediately. But we had to draw a plan, like I told you. We had about 20 parastatals, and they're all, we had to synergize. We had each parastatal had its work to do. The NMA, the policy, is charged with the policy of maritime, and the railway, so many other parastatals. But what is important is that we tried to structure the programs on how we can ease the ports first and foremost. First and foremost, I remember that the ports, the seaports, the Apapa port, one Saturday we had to flush out the wharf rats, what you call wharf rats, who were living in all sorts of squalors and so on. And in fact, nothing, because it was a disaster. But Bello had to contend with it. We had to look into the Port Harcourt port. The Port Harcourt port was not really too functional. The Calabar port, has the silting problem. So we had to review all the problems that we had in the sector and started taking them off one by one. You mentioned the One port, and you mentioned the deep ocean terminal. We had to also look at that, but the important thing is that, as I said, we had a laid-down plan for all these ports, and every head of parastatal worked together for us to achieve synergy to clear the ports and be able to move goods. Now, there's something you said initially about the problems. I can tell you that the problems I saw in the sector was structuring the funding. Structuring the funding was a major problem. How to get the ports maintained the way they should and avoid the dilapidation. It was a very difficult task for us. How to, the ports became everybody's working ground. We had all sorts of people going there. So, and we have to streamline that too. What should be going on at the ports? We had the dock workers union to contend with. We had, in fact, there was, there are other issues, that were impeding the port operations. The problem also, I noted, was that the international operators, the shipping lines and so on, they succumbed to the system. They were part of the system, even though they tried to accuse Nigerian ports of corruption and so on and so forth. They were part of the system. And so what do we do in a chaotic situation like that? So first, as I said, we had to work with them and sort out the problems they said they were encountering at the ports. We got the activities put together under one hall so that the clearing agencies, who also had their own issues, would work harmoniously and seamlessly with the port authority. So for now, what I can tell you is that the problems then were too many. In terms of infrastructure, the ports were not well equipped. The environment was not conducive. And we started working on that, on equipping the ports and rebuilding the structures. As I can tell you, if you are, if I'm to be specific, most of the parastatals, had a lot to do with the sanitization and the easing out the operation of the ports. I remember that the Port Authority,
Hello?
They had about 41 tables for you to clear goods. It was difficult for anybody to operate there. And we took that task on and we cleared it and had only one table. I'm talking about Port Authority because I'm talking with Bello. But we had other parastatals that had work to do. Like the Nigerian dockyard, they were building vessels. We had, like I said, the railway system, if I'm to talk about that, also a disaster. So Pat, if you ask me specifically, which each of these problems, how we solve them or how we plan for them, I'd be happy to be more specific.
Yeah,
I'm giving you random ideas of what I met on ground.
Thank you so very much. I was trying to focus more on planning. Every facility has a lifespan, has a maintenance scheme. I remember when Fashola came to see work on the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, he made a point that at every junction point, the expansion points on the road, the expectation that every 5 years they will be replaced. In 40 years, they had never been replaced. Put the same thing back in the port. Technically, most ports in Nigeria have now exceeded the lifespan they were built for. You can see they're collapsing around the place in Apapa, here and there. How did the ministry get about planning for replacement and expansion, knowing that international trade was going to go up anyway, population was going up and all of that? I wonder what specific plans they were and what challenged the implementation of those plans.
Thank you very much. Pat, what we did, we set up committees, intra-ministry committees, to have a master plan for the ports. And one thing about ports, the transport sector, is a commercialized sector. And I can't tell you that funds were ever appropriated for any infrastructure. The ports used what was available to them. And remember, they also had to pay into federation account to build the infrastructure. Secondly, one challenge we had in our time was the issue of privatization. Because as we were planning, the privatization of the ports was going on simultaneously. And therefore, we had a lot of clash of interests. For us, we believed that we should improve the facilities. We believed that we should modernize the facilities. We believe that we should be more futuristic. And then even if the facilities were being privatized or commercialized, then, you know, the status will determine the price. But BPE did not see it the way we saw it. But we managed to do what we could. And we also believe that if we depended on government to fund the facilities, then it will not be possible. So some of the functions we got on a build, operate, and transfer basis. And what we tried to do with on a port, for instance, we were discussing, in fact, we had gone far with private companies. And the idea was, you see, in the transport sector, this is a commercialized sector. If you, then we thought that if we gave out on a port, for instance, you know, on a build, operate, and transfer basis, then government will not have to put their own money into the development of the deep sea terminal there. So we tried to do things which we could manage with the funds we had and which we could engage private sector to work with us. So one, we, the ports, especially the ports in Lagos, we actually tried to transform the ports. We tried to equip the ports. We tried to initiate 24-hour service at the ports for maintenance, because as we are improving the facilities, we are also working on the maintenance of the ports. But the important thing is that we followed through a plan. We had to work out our plan and what we needed to do. Unfortunately, as I told you, we had our plan, BPE had their plan. And in fact, it was a lot of problem for us. I must be honest with you. You know, so I cannot tell you that in spite of BPE, we continued with our development, but not as much as we wanted to effect it. But after I left, I spent 11 months in the Ministry of Transport. After I left, I think Bello was there. They continued with the development and then the privatization and the commercialization and so on and so forth continued. And I don't know what the situation was after that. But what I can tell you is that we had a good plan. We had our policies. We reviewed our policies and we cleared the ports. We tried to make them user-friendly. Unfortunately, we had to contend with the privatization process, and we did not agree with their own approach. So I think Bello can take it from there.
I'll return to him in a second, you know, because I was involved at that stage the talk was about commercialization of Nigerian Ports Authority. And I actually then led the committee from TCPC looking at the commercialization of Nigerian Ports Authority. Perhaps I'll return to Malam Gwandu here and ask why commercialization failed.
I think, Prof, with due compliments to Dr. Chema Chikwe, Her Excellency, I think she has said things that were actually happening. We were supposed to contend with a problem that has become almost cancerous to the port. The issue of lack of equipment, the issue of procedures that have become almost absolute. And, Her Excellency has done a tremendous work and trying to shift to get the focus. But then, of course, the issue of commercialization and privatization came in. And in the ports, Prof, we were a bit confused. In fact, he used to call them TCPC, but we used to call them tipsy, because we are not really sure what our position as a port should be. Are we being commercialized? Are we being privatized? And at the same time, we're trying to improve on the existing infrastructure where we're facing a tremendous amount of policy change. So it's really, the Port Authority were often become a subject of beating by almost everybody, while the volume of traffic coming into Nigeria was getting extremely high. So in the first place, the child is getting confused what really does the government want. That is gone to the past. I think the focus has been on a private sector becoming involved in the development of the port, which has started now in Lagos. In fact, even before then, Nicotes and other private companies that started operating in the ports were an initial attempt to bring public and private partnership into port operation. And Ambassador Dr. Chema Chikwe had always advocated that the burden for the port is too much. The government is not funding. The income that we are getting from the port are being taken into government treasury, which is contrary to the Ports Act. Because the income from the port is supposed to go for the development of the new ports. Government is under a tremendous amount of pressure for resources into various public and national projects. So the port was being looked as a cash cow. We were not a regional port, we are only now a national port. All of a sudden, free market opened.
Mm-hmm.
The world trade becomes completely open. Before we were a laissez-faire economy. So you have to source fund from the private sector to build a new port. In order to get funds from the private sector and the international finances, you need confidence. The private sector could not invest if there is no confidence on its investment that is secure. So we are actually a bit lost unless we have got a long-term plan, not a 5-year plan, a 20-year plan of how we are going to develop our ports. We will still be addressing the issues in bits by bits.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not an easy job that time for the Minister of Transport, because she had a lot of political pressure to improve on the ports. But most of the problems in the ports are not only the Port Authority issue. you have got customs issue, you have got NDLA issue, you have got labor issues. So a lot of interest. In fact, the port itself is a nation, because all the institutions that have interest look at ports at something. But an efficient port is supposed to serve the country in reducing the cost of handling. Every agency wanted to be in the port.
Mhm.
So we really need to look at ports, like Ambassador said, as a commercial entity for which funds can be got in its operation and developed into new ports. Thank God, we have a lot of Nigerians who have got the guts to invest in infrastructure. It's not only the ports, but you can see also, the refinery, which has been built in Lagos, but it all needs to confine within the national master plan. And you really, when you look at what happened in the past, Prof, I hope I'm not talking too much.
You're not talking too much. In fact, you are not talking enough.
I'm not talking enough.
It's essential, Bello.
Yes.
You know that the infrastructure financing of today's world largely is private sector driven. Capital is available all over the world, including for us. The reason that it is not coming in to develop our infrastructure is the way that we have positioned ourselves. Australia is a global leader in infrastructure finance. Even the small town of Bloomington, Indiana, where I lived when I was a graduate student in the 70s in the United States, the road that goes from Indianapolis through Bloomington today is owned by an Australian company. And so the big question is how we have not managed to position our ports so that private capital coming from around the world, as is the case in, say, the Philippines, will come in and develop this infrastructure. I mean, we've seen the Lekki Concession Company, for example, one of those Australian banks was involved in the finance. And there are many still waiting on standby to actually invest. What we need to do to facilitate infrastructure like that coming.
You want me to comment? Can I comment?
Yes, come in, please.
You see, long-term venture capital require an atmosphere whereby the private sector has full confidence that the agreement it has entered with any nation is consistent. There has not been any new policy that is coming up to threaten its investment. Unfortunately, you can look at the example of the discourse. Most of the discourse, actually, you don't find any foreign money coming in. I could remember when we went to America with Dr. Kema Chukwe, we went even at that time before Aero started its problem, to look at people who are coming in to invest in the ports. But don't forget, some of these things can become extremely sensitive, because as a highly distinguished politician who is working for the country, they are also scared that people will come on and put them in the newspaper and say, oh, they have sold the country. So we really have to indicate where we want the private sector to come in, and that we should make our ports to become much more international by nature. Take, for instance, this Togo, next door to us, that is taking some parts of our cargo. What was the reason? As a result of too many regulations for goods to come in. It is extremely important for us to understand the concept for which people are bringing their goods in for transshipment. You want an efficient port that is low cost in operation, that the speed is extremely important. And all these things are things which, at that time, Dr. Kemachukwu was much more focused. I didn't know who her advisors were, but she was hammering on it. And you have to come up and talk to the government to understand how to attract investors into various other services. It's not only Nigeria.
Mm-hmm.
We scare away investors sometimes by our attitude. Even on privatization, you find, so political interference sometimes can also make the investors a bit scared. But by the way, Nigerian ports have the capacity to become the central hub for the whole of Africa if there is proper articulation. And by the time the minister, honorable minister left, then that one would be for another story. But
can I comment at this point?
I have no records to comment on her, but she did as much as is humanly possible. You know.
Yeah, can I come in, Pat? Can I?
Yes,
Hello?
please come in.
Okay, Pat, you know, it's interesting what Bello is saying. And we're talking about the present and the future now. I think that's what is important. As long as there is political will to develop and maintain Nigerian ports, things will be okay. But where is it coming from? Where is the problem coming from? It's funding. It boils down to funding of the infrastructure. There must be a plan to modernize the infrastructure. There must be a plan to maintain that infrastructure. And there must be projection, as Bello said, even beyond 20 years. Infrastructure planning cannot be short-term planning. And it boils down to funding. Now, I don't know how the ports are composed now, but I remember when we came on tour to America, we visited Port Elizabeth. When I got back, I said to them, we went to Port Elizabeth. You go through the port, you don't see anybody, but you see what's going on. Any agency you see has something directly to do with the ports, because ports are also security sensitive. Security sensitive. Whatever you do, I think now we have gone, because of we're talking about World Trade Organization and so on. We're talking about after, you know, this trade agreement in Africa and so on. Now, how can we actualize ours? How can we realize ours? How can we exploit our potentials in order to be in the lead? We cannot unless okay, I think I'm having problem with my network. Let me get it better. So what I'm saying essentially is that you, Pat, when you were speaking, you referred to Singapore, you referred to other countries. Bello talked about Republic of Benin. Nigeria is a much bigger country, and we have ports that if they are properly developed, the whole of West Africa will depend on Nigerian ports. So I think it boils down on political will. No matter what we say, no matter what plan we have, there's too much political interference. For instance, when you are appointing officers or management of a place like NPA or NMA and so on, there shouldn't be political consideration. And that's what we avoided. You took experts. When you listen to Bello Wando speak, you know that Bello Wando is a professional. And it's very, very important. We cannot, somebody who has no idea of, it's not just about ports. There are technicalities that are attached to the job. There's professionalism. So if somebody goes to the university to study port management or port engineering, is different from somebody who is a politician who is favored to take charge of the port. So these are the things that we have to look at. So whatever plan we have, and we now have to review our plan because things are changing. It's a dynamic sector. Things are changing and the world is changing. So I think, Pat, our major focus should be on, Nigeria having the political will for us to develop the port infrastructure and political will to ensure that professionalism is applied. And we compare ourselves with other countries. If you compare the heads of the parastatals when we were there and after, you will understand what I'm saying. So we make 20 steps forward and probably 30 backward. It doesn't make for progress. You see, everything we are saying now, I've been to Apapa Port recently. It's even difficult to get there because also part of the port development is, you see, we have this intermodal transport system. You consider that the ports is not an entity by itself, it's transportation. Therefore, the connectivities, you have to link.
Well, I was actually going to get to that in the next issue I was going to raise. I mean, look at
if you allow me to land,
okay.
Pat, I'm getting to something. Part of it is the ports will maintain the road to let out the goods that have come in. They don't get stuck there. When I was there, one of the first things we achieved was to resuscitate the railway system in the port to Lilliport Pond. So if you put the containers in the train, train is a bulk carrier, and it's easier to use train. And when you use these lorries and so on, and have gridlock and break the roads and so on, it's a different matter, and then they're not maintained. Now, we restored the train, and we celebrated it and so on. But I mean, after I didn't hear much about it again. But this is what needs to happen. It needs to happen because it happens in other countries that their ports are working very well. Any port you see, you will see that there's an airport around. You will see that there's a proper road to take the goods away. You see train, and it's very, very important. And how do you do this? Honestly, if we rely on government to develop the transport sector, it's not going to work. I have seen it. We have to commercialize. We have to commercialize all the operations in that sense, but not commercialize based on political interest. Because we have to think about our country and the people doing business. You know, I used to tell people when I was Minister of Transport, if you import tomato paste and it incurs demurrage, if it's supposed to be 4 naira in the market, it becomes 4,000 naira. I'm giving hypothetical figures. It increases the price. And who is suffering? The common man who goes to the market. You see, so the port development is an integral part of even human development and our national development in totality. If you want me to continue, I'll go on.
You know, okay, now, oh, thank you very much. And it comes back to national planning. Our country has recently completed work on a new national development plan. Part of what happened with national planning in the 60s, beginning from the 50s, was what enabled us to get ahead when we did. Obviously, for a season, planning lost its place. And now we're trying to plan again, and part of the reason is the experience of the ports. We have brought in private capital into port development, and we have concession the whole port, a deep sea ocean terminal being built in Lekki. But there is no road, no rail, nothing linking that new Lekki port to anywhere or anything. Already the one road that goes to Ekpe is over congested. And Dangote Refinery is going to start producing on that axis. Then we have this new port. How come things like this completely escape those who are planning, even private sector people? And perhaps this.
You may comment?
Yeah, please, Madam Bandru, yes.
Pat, we have supported what is called National Ports Council. National Port Council should constitute the Port Authority, the Customs, Shippers Council, the private sector, so that the approval for any development that's related to port should be subject to the examination and approval of this council. This council is a sector that brings on everybody, and it should be seen to be effective in its work. But like we said earlier, the port itself has got itself into tipsy. We started with a new law to change the port system so that it becomes, whether it is now, it is a landlord port. So really, the planning of the port should be subject to vigorous approvals by the various stakeholders. It is through this process of planning approval that they will identify the areas where there are gaps, so that the public and the stakeholders and other people could comment on it. But you know, the civil servants and other people have taken over the control. So it's really need to go back to the drawing board. In the previous years, you used to have, even on the board of MP, the customs, the railways, the various other stakeholders who have a professional and a business interest in the port. You know, the Office of the National Security Advisor, all the other agencies, because the port is one of the most important instruments that affects almost everybody's life. If it runs efficiently, it makes life easier for the businessman, life easier for the common man, life easier even for the security. But at the moment, things are really going, it can be very difficult. Because you need to.
Can I come in again?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Bello, remember the Ministry of Transport in 1999. I think I should have said this earlier. The first thing we did was to review the transport policy of Nigeria. And we worked closely with the Ministry of Works and other Ministry of Finance and other ministries that were involved. But we developed a transport policy for the sector. We did. I can tell you one thing, one problem we have. There is no policy you don't have in Nigeria. That policy is integrated. We even looked at, in fact, we had to drop one of the parastatals that had to do with transport, buses and so on and so forth, you know, because it wasn't necessary for the ministry and so on to take it. It was purely private and so on. Okay, there is nothing. In fact, we cannot reinvent the wheel. There is nothing that has not been planned in Nigeria. The problem is implementation. Implementation and review, because it's a dynamic process. Because times change, technology changes. In fact, when I came into the ministry, one of the first things I did was to make it mandatory from level 7 up to learn computer, because we didn't have computerized systems. And that was also, Bello, remember, one of the things we tried to infuse into the port operations also, computerization. So we have the policy. I don't know what happened to the policy, you know, after I left, but I can tell you that what is a problem in Nigeria is implementation, and I keep emphasizing on political will. Once there's political will, if you are a public officer and you really believe that you want changes, then there must be that political will. You cannot, I didn't know Bello Gwando before, but by reputation and by his CV, it was obvious that he was expert in port. I didn't know Sarumi before. He was in shipping council. We took Dr. Ene because of his background for NMA, which is the policy arm of maritime. You know, and then you also, it's very important as you are implementing, if at all you're implementing, you assess annually. I know we used to have annual reports on what we achieved, but even though I didn't stay, I stayed barely 1 year in Ministry of Transport. I know we had review, and we also had American government, because the President Obasanjo, was very, very instrumental to a lot of the international contacts we had. I know that the American government, both in transport and in aviation, they assisted very much with training programs. We trained our staff, and there is no way you can run that's the sector without training and retraining. And you must have staff who are consciously working the way others are working in any other country. We like I said, we are not in isolation. We cannot also, every time we have Nigerian culture in what we are doing. So if we're going to improve infrastructure and maintain infrastructure, it is important that political leadership considers that it is an entity that should not be politicized. Because the transport sector, you're talking about Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala is at WTO. She's there, she's a Nigerian, but she's there seeing that the rest of the world are keeping up with a system, an integrated system. There's no different way of operating in that sector for
I would
any
like
country.
to support the Honorable Minister. You know, a prof,
Yeah.
when you have a board, that the board itself, almost 80% of them are politicians. They don't even understand the port. You don't have somebody who has got a professional or business interest in the port. What do you expect them to discuss? In the previous years, the stakeholders of the industries are the major board members. I had been an MD where some of the board members don't even know where Calabar Port is. And you just have to, as the chief executive, try to see what you can do to accommodate and understand them, because this is a government policy.
Yeah, but you see the ports.
Yeah,
the ports operations.
It's a specialized area for which Ambassador Kema said, political interference should be as little as possible. We run the risk.
There is no question that political interference is a major part of the problem in the sector. But the sector is international. The standards are international. The conventions that must be acknowledged are international. Whether it's in the ports, whether it's in airports. And our inability to stay on top of these international expectations have created challenges for us. What should be the appropriate thing? Just like FIFA will say to Nigerian Football Federation, if you don't follow this tradition, sorry, you are out. Should we be doing the same thing, asking international bodies to set regulations for our sovereign country? What must we do to be able to be competitive globally in what is a global industry? Ports, perhaps we can use aviation examples because that's important. And I will call in somebody I know on this call in a minute. Chibuzo Nwachukwu, who's worked in this area. What must we do to gain the respect of the international players, the international community we belong to? Every day, we're running to ICAO meetings in aviation. We're running to the maritime ones. We're seeking to get elected, but we just are not pulling up to scratch. I mean, our ports or our waterways have become very unsafe, almost overtook Somalia at some point and all of that. What could we be doing to maintain standards?
Pat, can I say something?
Yes.
Pat, please, you see, there's my one observation I had as a Minister of Transport and Minister of Aviation is we work closely with World Bank. But one problem we have in Nigeria is that I don't know how we manage to seduce those who work with us sometimes. Because if the World Bank sets a standard, they must insist on that standard with Nigeria. You don't send people who write reports and I don't know, for some reason, if they write, either they write favorable results when they are not favorable, or when they write the real reports, they are not taken seriously. Like you mentioned WTO now. You have all these international organizations, the United Nations organizations and so on we have. Now, I think time has come also for them to engage us, and insist. See, for Ngozi to get that job, the politics that was involved. But the politics was based on, well, on interests, but the capacity was there, experience was there, knowledge was there. You see? So what is happening in Nigeria? If somebody is appointed a managing director of MPA, and World Bank is assisting in a program with that, and that person appointed has no experience, doesn't have the background, I think World Bank should itself also should turn that down and call the attention, because sometimes some of these things happen. The people who should know may not know in order to correct them. So it's a two-pronged issue. I think the international organizations that oversee these the transport sector should also set, there are standards, because we worked with them. We worked with them. For instance, I know the way well, we're not talking about aviation now, but the things that happened in the Ministry of Transport, we work closely with the World Bank also. Even when they were talking about privatization and so on, then I approached BP, I said, look, let's invite the World Bank for a conference or workshop, because they have a program for privatization. What do you do with the staff? What do you do? Do you engage them when you privatize? Do you let them off? What do you do if you're going to let them off? And so on and so forth. Now, if the World Bank follows up with Nigeria and is strict about its own policies, I think it will also help us. I think it will help us, because I don't know why things are not working properly and they continue.
You see, first, can I comment?
Go ahead.
You see, Ambassador Dr. Kemachukwu, when she was in the office, we never had as much what you can call political pressure. But if you know what is happening to other previous managing directors, they do not even have the time to sit down and work, because everybody is after them. During her time, we were talking about core values, how to improve on the efficiency, how much can we get support on other issues from the government. But I think our values seems to have taken a completely different dimension. Like she said, people that should be taken should have what you can call a thorough knowledge. The board of Port Authority should be a board for which people that have an interest in either on the government side or on the private side, sector side, will sit down and meet. So we have lost a lot of our focus. That's what I would like to say.
Sorry, for instance, you go to Onitsha, we open a port, inland waterway port there with fanfare. You would like to continue having reports on the value it has added to the economy. You like to have that. You see? And money is spent on most of these things, government money, that shouldn't be. But if a serious operator or serious operators take up that task of developing that port, they would like their businesses to flow. We are talking about, Bello, I'm happy you talked about a commission bringing professionals and the interest groups together because of this Dangote cement factory, the new ports, and so on and so forth you have there. Fine. You see, there's a problem we have, especially, well, now, most of these transport agencies, railway, MPA, Nigeria Airways, or Nigeria Airports, they have defined ownership of land where, that belonged to them. You know what? I don't know, for some reason, most of these lands were appropriated privately or otherwise. But elsewhere, you develop this land because it belongs to that sector. You use it for businesses that will also generate income and add value and add to the money for maintaining the sector. We haven't gone to aviation yet because I have a lot to say about that. You have to have a definite a picture. What does the port own and what doesn't the port own? Because if the port knows what it owns, if railway knows what it owns, the way railway properties were whittled away, it's ridiculous. Ridiculous. When I came on board, I was faced with litigations because of the ship acquisition loan of NMA that wasn't paid at the time. And the more you try to correct these things, the more enemies you make in the sector. You see what I'm saying? That really a lot of things have been considered before, but it is implementation. Nobody, the checks and balances are not there. And in fact, there is no sanction for things that are not done well. And I can tell you one thing also about appointing ministers. I'm sorry, I'm not the best, but I'm not the worst. Ministers for these professional or professionalized sectors, honestly, must be hands-on. I'm telling you, day to day, hands-on ministers. You must make sacrifices to understand what is happening under you. And also, you see, you can't really benefit from where you are in charge personally. There's nothing. Maybe I don't think we should shy away from the issue of corruption in the sector, especially commercialized sectors. There's too much corruption in those sectors. And it will be very, very important to automate systems. Anything, if you use the modern technology, it will help in curbing corruption in the transport sector. Automation. And I believe that is happening now because a lot more people in Nigeria have developed the computer culture. I think it's happening now. But then it has to be thoroughly supervised, thoroughly set up. And you know that every year, or this is, like I said before, it's a dynamic process that is changing. And so on, and we must align with the new technologies. We must align with the new technologies in the transport sector to minimize corruption. It's a major problem. And we can't finish this discussion without pointing at corruption at every level.
Pat, Prof.
Yep.
I hope you are with us.
I am fully so.
Yeah, because one of the issues that fundamentally came out talking about is not just the issue of corruption in terms of even the interest groups that are involved in issues that affect the ports. That's why you need a comprehensive process whereby the stakeholders are involved in decision making. Then, of course, government can still come in to look at the interest, overall general interest of the economy, because investment in ports is a long-term return. It's not a short term.
No.
And
Yeah.
its multiplier effect into the economy is extremely enormous.
Mhm.
If your container is delayed, you know who benefits?
The
The bank
entire economy
benefits.
pays the price.
Yeah, the bank benefits, because if you take a loan to import, the
Hmm.
longer your goods are staying in the port, the
Hmm.
bank are charging you more.
Hmm.
Now even the terminal operators also benefit.
Hmm.
So we need to have what you can call a comprehensive approach.
So who is the regulator of that sector? Because
That's
that has
why,
been confusing.
that's why the government ought to come out with who is the regulators. The government has not actually come out with a
Port
new law.
Authority is not a regulator. NIMASA pretends that it is a regulator sometimes. Who is the regulator in the sector?
No, statutorily, NIMASA is the regulatory arm of the maritime sector. And that's the truth. But NIMASA, as I see it, has deviated from professionalization.
Regulator and operator at the same time.
Exactly. It does not work like that. It does not, there's a conflict of interest.
Yep.
You know, but NIMASA should be dedicated. I remember when
And
we
isn't
banned,
all part of the corruption thing?
yes, when we banned the cargo sharing, it was like the world would end. Of course, I got the bashing, but it sanitized the system. You know, and it was through NIMASA. UNCTAD made the provision of, I think, 40-40-20 of this shipping, whatever, so on. But it was abused. It was abused. And then at the end of the day, who suffers? Anything that happens in the transport sector affects the common man. And that is very, very important and critical.
The knock-on effect on the rest of the economy.
Yeah, the rest of the economy. So,
NIMASA,
sorry, my dear. NIMASA,
I wouldn't like
NIMASA should be sanitized.
I wouldn't like to disagree with my former boss.
Okay.
Maritime, I cannot disagree, but I can also add something different. Maritime sector is a completely different sector. Cargo handling and cargo discharge in the port is completely a different activity. So you need somebody who is independent, because don't forget that we started from the Port Authority was responsible for everything.
Yeah.
Involved in cargo handling, was involved in guidelines on development of the new ports. Now, as we move toward a private sector participation, and you are relieving some of the activities from the ports, you need to get somebody who can be seen to be as an independent regulator, because it's not only the key apron. So this is subject to discussions from the various stakeholders, because it's sensitive to both organizations. It's sensitive to NIMASA, it's sensitive to Port Authority, it's sensitive to Shippers Council. You understand? So it is really, you need what you can call a regulator who possibly can bring all the other specialities from this organization together. You need to have an independent regulator.
Well, Bello, I really agree with you. You know, I mean, you're the professional. But what I'm trying to say is the terms of reference establishing NIMASA gave it the authority to be the policy arm. Fine. You're talking about regulator, and I agree with you. But you know, we have international regulators. all these sectors have international regulators. And we receive the protocols, the policy reviews and so on from the, from each of them. Like, again, in NPA, I agree to what you're saying, but also remember we were working closely with the European Shippers Council. No, shipping is not council. The shipping companies, their organization.
Like
We were
Max,
working, exactly. We were working with them too, in order to improve our own operations. But if what you're saying is to have an independent regulator, that would mean creating another body.
You
But I'm saying
already,
that
the ministry now.
No,
the
if we
ministry
look
now,
within the system. No,
Your
but
Excellency, the ministry now is the one who is becoming like a regulator because of administrative control. But you need a professional body for which it can be able to have what you can call a broader view, and be able to direct as possible. Because a number of times you take issues on marine to Ministry of Transport until and unless you are lucky enough to have somebody who can look at it on a marine issue. It's a very complicated case. MPA wants to be a regulator. A maritime wants to be a regulator. Shippers Council wants to be a regulator. Anyway, you know what you have gone through, madam. So you need
scenario.
You need an independent regulator.
But turning a little
hold on, Pat. My fear about independent regulator is that each time we create a body, we are creating more problems for the country and for the sector. That's my fear. That's why
that is a justifiable fear.
But I'm saying that within the system, I think a regulator can be extracted, can be identified.
Yes.
But that does not stop us from what Bello has said, to have a council, of operators. And in fact, we need
Port and Marine Council.
Yes. We need a body with minimal government influence.
Involvement, yes. The private sector now is taking a major prominent role in investment. So you need somebody who is also from the private sector, whether it is from Manufacturers Council, whether it is for those who are invested in the port. You see this new port that is coming in, with Aliko also building a refinery. So you have got a very strong investors in the maritime sector. So you need to somehow find a way where you can officially accept to hear their views. And if you don't hear the views, investors, who else are you hearing?
I agree with you, but we're talking to Pat, and I don't know, we're not talking, Pat, I do hope that this goes further than we think.
No, it should go further. There are many people following this conversation, by the way. It's going to be streaming, it's on Facebook and all of that, but ultimately it becomes part of a documented series on policy reform in Nigeria. And this is why this series is very important. Let me take advantage of this to switch to aviation for one quick second. Aviation
one
is
problem after another.
Yes, there are so many agencies now in aviation. SCAA, FAA, I mean, just AAA is all over the place. Yet infrastructure seems to just come in spots and starts. We focus on the buildings. It's a shame that all kinds of small local governments in the United States have 24-hour airports, and we have to be very lucky to have a couple that you can land after 6 p.m. I was shocked. I was living in Asaba last Friday. Yeah, it was Friday. And the flight was late and I was panicking until I realized that it seems now like night landing has come to Asaba. The aviation sector is handicapped because we have all this aviation equipment that can be run only between 7 and 7, literally speaking. Whereas aircraft are designed to be in the air all the time. Why is it? I mean, look at Owerri. How many years now? Owerri has been there nearly 40 years, and we still can't land at night. Last year I was stranded in Owerri because a flight I was going to take came in from Abuja. We're also anxious. It was 6:20 when it landed. Let us go quickly. Let us go quickly. As we were boarding, the captain said, no, it's too late now. He can't take off anymore. I called the airpeace people and said, this captain has a girlfriend in Owerri. He just wants to sleep in Owerri. Because an Arik flight took off 15 minutes after he said he couldn't take off anymore. But on a more serious side, why is aviation infrastructure so challenged after all these years with so many private operators? Now that we don't have, with security problems everywhere, people all want to fly, and we have these constraints.
But there are fundamental issues to aviation. And like I always said when I was Minister of Aviation is about lives of people hanging in the air, suspended in the air with nothing holding it except God and technology. So it is a very sensitive sector. When I became Minister of Aviation, in fact, when I was assigned to aviation, I was told that airports are the first port of call for investors because Nigeria was driving for investments. And by the way, I forgot to tell you that, Bello, remember we published a magazine, a handbook for investments in Nigerian ports sector. We did the same for aviation. Now, when you talk about Asaba Airport or Imo Airport, well, Asaba is private, it came later. When I came, all the airports, we also had reviewed our policy and looked at the planning, the airports and so on, and to provide infrastructure for each airport. There was no ILS in our airport. We provided that. The communication system was not working. We provided that. We did so many things, but let me tell you, if over airport you're talking about, you take a review, look at the data of the number of passengers daily at that airport and compare the revenue generated and the management of the airport itself. That will give you an idea why there is problem. Like I was saying, all the airports you see, they have all sorts of other ways of generating revenue. And we started that. Leasing spaces. But you see, if you come to Owerri Airport, you must have a defined area owned by the airport. So fund can also develop commercial activities that will support the maintenance and the equipment of the airport. It's a big challenge. Again, revenue generated is paid into a federation account. I never had one kobo for infrastructure development from government, like taking anything to tender, and it was approved. Everything we planned was BOT. MM2, when the airport, the domestic terminal got burnt, I wasn't there when I came, and they were going to award a contract to rebuild the same kind of building. I said, no. Infrastructural planning is at least for 1 century, especially in terms of construction of a building. And we have to modernize it, make sure that what should be there is there. We need hangars. The domestic airport then didn't have hangars. It was a bungalow and so on. But government was not going to finance it. So I advertised it. And that's how Babalaki's company got the contract. In fact, the first person that got the contract could not perform. We had to drop him and take the second in the bid. So funding is a very major factor also in the aviation sector. In fact, one of the things I drove as a Minister of Aviation was funding of aviation in Africa, especially, of course, my domestic Nigeria. Because then the global trend was liberalization. We signed the Open Sky Agreement and a lot came with it. So when we went for a conference in Canada, I introduced a memo which was supported by all the African countries of aviation funding. How do we fund aviation in Africa? Don't forget that as of 1999, when we came into government, you had only you had one airline, I think it was Air Afrique, shuttling. You could be stranded anywhere in Africa. Then, of course, the South African airline, but it was not doing the intra-network operation, and so on. So we saw that we had problem. If we're going to liberalize our skies, we also need funding to develop our own operations, our own aviation operations. So when you talk about Asaba Airport, you cannot land at night, that would entail 24-hour service. 24-hour service means electricity, water, in fact, all the components that you use in managing. So is the airport in Asaba in a financial position? Does it generate enough revenue to sustain all that? That is the question. I don't know, but I'm saying that this is fundamental. So what is happening is that, one, we don't have enough, let me say we don't have enough aircraft, assuming that the culture of our people is changing. You know, so there are some people who would never get into an aircraft, who are afraid of flying. There's so many reasons. There's superstition, this, that, and so on and so forth. So the passengers we have, yes, we do have congestions at the airport, but because we have few aircrafts operating. So how many flights land in Owerri daily? How many passengers are they carrying? How much revenue are they generating? These are the questions. So as we talk about infrastructure, it comes integrally with funding. And a lot could be done. The same problem transport sector has is the same problem aviation sector has. A lot of interference. I mean, I cannot tell the story. I mean, this program is not for the story of Nigeria Airways because it's a sordid story. And you talk about national carrier. I have my own views.
We're still talking
because
about
it's a
national carrier.
commercial sector. You know? So let me give you a chance. Maybe you want to say something at this point, then I can.
Yeah. First of all, I have to be very grateful for the time of both of you because I try to keep this conversation down to an hour and a half. We've already done an hour and a half of talking. But the key challenge, obviously, that we can see from all the comments made is that politics is significantly behind the reason for infrastructure failure in our country. Because the way that our politics goes makes it difficult for confidence to come to our sector from the international investing public, the source of capital that's available in excess. The French economist Thomas Piketty, is now the, I guess, leading authority on capital. And the point he makes is that at no point in human history has there been so much capital available as is the case today. The problem with capital is that a good part of it is in a few hands. Globalization has enabled the concentration of capital. To access that capital, we must therefore be able to position ourselves as good brides. And the nature of interference in the public sector in Nigeria makes it such that the Forbes magazine conclusion of 28 May 2019 was that Nigeria was Africa's money, I'm quoting them now, Africa's money losing machine. The easiest way to lose money is to enter Nigeria. We have seen the experience of several companies. Can our politics not manage to insulate sources of revenue for growth from politics? What could be done to ensure that political action does not impoverish us? Arena, we can actually allow development in the critical areas. Any concluding thoughts on this? And then we'll close today's meeting.
Yeah, Pat, let me give you one quick example. In April 2011, we signed a contract for total radar coverage in Nigeria. At that time, we signed it with Thales, that's the manufacturer. And it was only Nigeria and South Africa that signed that contract. South Africa took off, okay? In 2021, that's last year, I also now noticed, and when we signed that contract, we tied it on to IATA, because IATA collects the air revenue, and we made it automatic that IATA will be the body paying for the total radar coverage. By the time I left, it was changed. The government paying for it. I now saw that last year, 98 billion or so was appropriated for total radar coverage again. Where do you start? I think either 98 or 78, some figure, some high figure. But this is something, if we organize the aviation sector properly, IATA collects a lot of money for the sector. When I came, I stopped individuals from collecting it. I made it automatic. So if IATA is collecting it, it is recorded, it's on record. You know how many overflights, aircraft that overfly Nigeria and so on and so forth. Because IATA has the records all over the world. So what we can do is to go back to do the right thing. If we work with the international bodies, we will not go astray. Assigning people to be collecting revenue anyhow and so on. Even the gates are not automated. How do you show that those gates that they mount at the airport, that the money goes to the airport? You're not sure. And we're borrowing money to build airports. So
I think what needs to be done in conclusion is that all the established agencies, international and national, should do what they are supposed to do. And for us, funding in the aviation sector must be clearly defined. How do you generate the revenue? How do you get the revenue? How do you improve on the airline? I used to have meetings with the airline operators of Nigeria. For instance, Air Peace and other airlines are doing well. How do you support them to do better? How does the funding come? And I believe that because it's a private sector thing, all government needs to do is to give the support. And so long as the business is going on, revenue is generated, the money meant for generated, the revenue accruing should be used for the maintenance of the airport and the facilities. So for me, it is funding. How do you generate the funding, the funds? How do you manage the funds? How do you maintain the facilities? How do you modernize? How do you expand? And that is very important. These have to be defined clearly, and which agency does what, which body does what. Finally, these sectors, both transport and aviation, must be devoid of political interferences. And they are professionalized, and the people managing the system in these sectors must be professionals, and they must be training and retraining, because the process is dynamic, because the whole world is changing. Since COVID 2000, the COVID-19, the dynamics have changed. And when the dynamics change, it involves a lot of things. New funding, new approach, and that must be respected by our country. Because we are talking about people, we're talking about development, we're talking about other sectors that are affected by the operations of transport and aviation, and every sector is affected.
Thank you so very much. We truly value you and the input you have made today. Let's take a closing thought from Malam Bello Gwandu.
Well, I'm not sure that I can add more than what the Honorable Minister has said, because all the things that she has mentioned is about political interference. The stakeholders who are in the industries should also be at the forefront, because really Nigeria is moving into a free market. We need a private capital to come in. People who are investing want to have the confidence that they are dealing with this policymaker today, and they're also dealing with him for a long period of time. Sometimes in our life experience, there are so many changes that even the chief executive himself got a bit confused. I started with the Honorable Minister Kema. We started getting along with the work. We understand what her interest is, and all of a sudden I hear she was changed. So I have to spend another 6 months to start teaching the new Honorable Minister why is Boni, why is Apapa, why is it? So it's very demanding on the management. If you look at Onne Port was built by a port authority without funding, capital funding from the government. Of course, it was abandoned during Shagari. But my boss then wanted, we said, listen, we can start to build this port professionally, gradually, as cargo expands, they use the money to develop some stage. So private sector participation is extremely important in both the aviation and also the port industry. As we move into the next millennium, Nigeria is going to play a very major, significant role in terms of becoming a major hub, because African free trade that is coming up, it means that the borders are going to be open. So too many regulations that were there before would eventually have to be reduced. If we have to be competitive, we must encourage for the building of new ports, with private sector be involved, with the government also becoming a major stabilizing force. Because if you leave everything straight to the private sector, you can have, prices going escalating, and it will have a very negative effect on our economy. Thank you very much for allowing us to participate in this your program, and we'll be looking forward to contribute in the near future.
Thank you
so
so
much,
very
Pat.
much.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm
Appreciate this.
inviting Bello.
Hope that this will keep enlightening the policy arena so that Nigeria can make. Thank you. God bless.
Thank you.